Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar this time on YouTube Live. It's first for us doing YouTube Live. So we are, as usual, running into some technical difficulties where I managed to start the event and then went offline again, deleting the whole event. So we set up this new link, and I see that some people are already joining in. So that's really good. It means that my my inaptness in the technical realm is not completely blocking us from giving this webinar. But that would be no problem. I'm just going to start sharing my screen, get the slides up there, and I'll just check with you if you can also see these slides right now and see them moving. Maybe if my colleagues who are here can shoot me a text, tell me if you can see the slides moving, because I cannot see you anymore. I just see my slides at this moment. And then we'll dive right into it. And of course, this webinar will be recorded. So even though we probably won't be able to get everyone in here because of our technical error, you can always share this with your colleagues. And there will be a link available on YouTube. So we'll just dive right into it. In a minute, I'll give some people a little bit more time to join. And then we can get started on this webinar on stakeholder engagement. So as I just said, I'm also not able to see the chat right now. I'm working from home today. There's one screen. I just see my slides. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat. There will be no problem at all, but I'll get to them a little bit later after I've gone through the subject matter with you. And I think that that being said, we should just dive right into it. Our first YouTube live webinar. You know, we've tried Zoom and Teams, Meet, and now there's YouTube Live. So hopefully we're in for a good one. So my name is Philip Jordanov. I'm a behavioral scientist with a background in cognitive psychology and neuroscience. I am a huge fan of the human brain and behavior, and how our brain anatomy and our brain functionalities can explain the way that we make decisions. But it goes a lot broader than that. We're also fascinated by how context and processes and environment affect human behavior. And as behavioral scientists, you know, we study that picture, the empirical study of human behavior. We try to make it applicable, try to make it into something that organizations can use to change behavior in a positive way. That's our mission at Neurofied, our company. We're a behavior change company. Basically, what that comes down to is it's our job to translate all these insights from behavioral psychology and neuroscience and also cognitive psychology and other behavioral sciences to very practical and actionable interventions so that organizations can change, so that they can help their people make better decisions, become more productive, become more satisfied in the way that they work. And you know, this is incredibly broad. I'm aware of that. So we'll dive into some of the specifics and make sure that you have some very actionable takeaways today. Um, a great announcement that we're super happy to make is that our book is in pre-sale, and I said it during the last webinar as well, and where we're closing in on the release date as well, where you can get a physical copy. So we wrote this book about what I was talking about, applying behavioral science to the specific use case of managing organizational change. We have all these organizations in, you know, the current world that we live in, that are undergoing rapid transitions and transformations, cultural changes, technological changes, change. That's here to stay, that's for sure. But at the center of these changes are human beings, you know, the way that our brains are wired, the way that our brains have been working for many hundreds, if not thousands of years, sometimes are not fully aligned with the way in which we expect organizations to function. So what we try to do with this book is make change very human-centric, get all the evidence-based practical insights from behavioral science and make them very applicable for organizational managers to make sure that they can navigate change more effectively in a more human-centric and positive and sustained way. So if you're someone that is dealing with organizational change or that is interested in this topic of changing behaviors in organizations, I would recommend you get a copy of this book, or listen to these webinars, because these webinars are aimed at going into some of the interventions of our book I give you a little bit of a preview, a little bit of a skim of the iceberg, as if it were, and to show you if this might be something for you, something that can help you become more effective in your role as a professional, as a manager, or just as a human being overall. So we've been doing this webinar series about the book, and this is the fourth one, if I'm not mistaken. And we're skimming the chapters of the book and the interventions and techniques from behavioral science that we cover there, and we bring them in an actionable format. Today is all about stakeholder engagement. So we have all these pillars when it comes to changing organizations. And well, one of the most important ones is being able to engage the broader organization, understand your stakeholders, and bring them into the change. Keep them engaged, keep them motivated, deal with resistance in a productive way, welcome divergence and debate and discussion, and create change together and not just top down. There are three categories of intervention that I want to go through today: psychological safety, organizational network analysis, also known as ONA. Um, that's why, because the abbreviation, so I'll make that clear later on. And a red blue team. And probably some of you have already heard of some of these interventions. If you're into behavioral science, then probably you have. And what we found is that these interventions that are so well researched by behavioral science can be applied very effectively in an organizational change context. So that's what we're going to do today. You'll get some very practical tips and tools at the end of this webinar while you eat your lunch, on your way to your next meeting. Maybe you can even apply them straight away. So taking one step back, why are we doing this in the first place? Why would you need behavioral science interventions? Why would you need to understand human psychology to navigate change effectively? Well, that comes down to the human brain and behavior. And one of the things that I like to discuss with my colleagues and my clients is our brains are not per se, aversive to change, but there are some conditions in which our brains are very, let's say, suspicious of change. The way in which our brains are wired, evolutionary speaking, we survived only so far, not because we're the strongest animal, but because we're very good at intuitively navigating risk and ambiguity and uncertainty, making sure that you don't walk into the lion's den, but collaborate together, be a group, and progress. And now these old patterns are hardwired into our brain and sometimes cause us to resist change. And this is not an at random process. This is actually quite predictable because it relates back to these old patterns in the brain. Some people call them heuristics, some people call them logical fallacies, some people call them cognitive biases. Of course, they're all different from each other. They're all different types of barriers and factors, but understanding these processes and understanding how the brain and the behavior responds to change from a human-centric point of view is very, very much key in driving change in a productive way. So when we're talking about leadership support and also engaging stakeholders, which is the key, what can you do as a change manager or a change leader to engage stakeholders? We see that there are lots of biases or fallacies or heuristics that might occur in the brain. Like we might have stakeholders that are very much motivated for change. They have an intention to change, but they're not really able to translate that into their behavior. Sometimes because the behaviors that we seek are just not clearly communicated, they're not specified enough. Our stakeholders are not motivated enough, or they don't have all the capacities or opportunities to execute these new behaviors that are corresponding to change. And then there's planning fallacy. We, as change managers or leaders, we always, we plan, and there are whole plans, roadmaps, Gantt charts outlining the change. But usually there are lots of small intuitive errors or biases in this planning that makes it very hard to engage stakeholders, to really draw them into change. And then there is the sunk cost fallacy, which is a very specific logical fallacy or cognitive bias, which occurs in all of our brains. Planning change is hard because we can't know everything that happens in the future. We don't know what's going to set us back or which costs are going to overrun. But for our stakeholders, the same is true. We have stakeholders that might have already invested a lot in old processes, in old cultures, in their old position in the organization, and they experience what we call sunk cost, a very specific type of thinking pattern or bias or heuristic that causes them to resist change. So, and this is just like I'm showing you a small image of what is going on in the brain and mind and behavior that might be a very strong driver of change. And now the problem with these, what we call them, we often like to refer to them as cognitive biases, but as I said, they're not all cognitive biases. There are tons of behavioral drivers, heuristics, fallacies, opportunities, barriers, hurdles to overcome to make sure that we behave in a way that is aligned with strategy, that is aligned with our own interests. But when we look at these brain factors, right, the biases, the fallacies, they're hardwired, they're subconscious. It's just the way that our brain is built through evolution. We can't really change that with bias training or diversity training in 5, 15 weeks. It's just the way that our brains are made. And of course, we are very adaptive. We can think in different ways, but we'll always have these hardwired patterns that also influence our decision making. Biases are not observable, they're not measurable because they happen over here in the brain. And most importantly, biases, these thinking patterns, right? They're amplified by organizational factors. So when you what we talked about just now, that sunk cost fallacy, right? You already invested a lot in the old situation, the old processes, in the old decision making, and it's really hard to let go and to get into the new. Well, that's just a fact of human nature. We all have this sunk cost fallacy. But when that sunk cost fallacy makes its way into organizational decision making processes, into the way that we manage and plan and lead change, this is when it can become very problematic because then we move from one brain to many brains that are all susceptible to these unconscious barriers and thinking patterns and also other factors that drive our behavior in ways that are not totally obvious to the change manager that is working on a change project or the leaders that are supporting change or the stakeholders in the organization that have to respond to and engage with change. So the book, the premise of the book and the premise of Neurofied's way of working, how we as behavioral scientists help organizations change, is we don't want to take biases out of people. We don't want to change the way their brain is wired. We just want to take them out of processes, of policies, of systems, of organizational context and culture. That is something that you can tangibly and measurably change. And if you change the context in a very evidence-based, step-by-step empirical way, you can find that you can change behavior way more effectively than when you try to change individual brains and minds. So that's what we're going to do today. We have some interventions lined up for you. This is an image that you probably, if you follow the webinar, for me, you've seen it before. This is our book in one picture. And it's also some of the most common interventions from behavioral science that we worked into this organizational change format. Today, we're going to look at interventions for stakeholder engagement. How can we make sure that when we engage in organizational change, that when we roll out an organizational change plan as change managers or leaders, how can we make sure that our people are engaged, that they want to go with us, that they're motivated, that they have the capacities, the opportunities, and the motivation to change? Okay, well, these interventions, they're quite, we can write an entire book about each of these little squares. So bear with me as we will go through them quite quickly, high level, but we'll keep it very practical so that you can have some takeaways from this. Okay, let's start with the first one, which is about psychological safety. This is something that you've heard before, this term, because it's wildly popular these days, and rightfully so. If there's an organization that has high psychological safety or a team, they're way more agile, adaptive, innovative, and they have positive responses to change, and they're just very resilient. So psychological safety is one of these things that's an unmissable cornerstone of organizations that have to change constantly. And it does all these amazing things. There's so much research about psychological safety and how it engages people, how it facilitates decision making in a more dialogue-driven way, how it fosters a culture of daring to make mistakes, continuous improvement, learning. And it's so important because there are lots of misconceptions about psychological safety as well. A lot of people think that it's about being nice and saying that everything is okay. I would say it's quite the opposite. It's about having the real conversation, making sure that everyone is able to weigh in into decision-making processes and into organizational changes in a way that is sometimes very intense, right? People can really clash, but because they have this underlying feeling of psychological safety, they feel like they can bring their own arguments, their real self, their full self to the process, which is just immensely important for stakeholder engagement. There's this pyramid that you might have seen, especially if you're in management. It's Patrick Lencioni's functional and dysfunctional team diagram, where he has all these elements that make for either a great team or a team that is not very high performing. And way at the bottom we see trust, and I would actually put psychological safety either there within trust or maybe even below trust, because a lot of people confuse psychological safety with trust. And that is true because they're very much overlapping. There is a lot to psychological safety that also goes for trust and the other way around. But in the end, trust is something that is, it's a phenomenon that occurs between two individuals or two parties. Psychological safety, on the other hand, is a group phenomenon. So it's either there within a team at an abundant rate and people are all experiencing it, or it's not. And the same goes for organizations. It's not a binary thing, an off or on thing, but it is a group feeling. So it's a shared belief that it's okay to take interpersonal risks. And that, what I mean with that is voice concerns, get into the conversation, have a seat at the table, be heard, um, dare to make mistakes without fearing negative repercussions from your manager, being yelled at by your teammates. That is the embodiment of psychological safety. How do you do that? Well, we have a relatively small section in our book dedicated to psychological safety, but there is another great read out there by Amy Edmondson. You should know her if you're into this stuff. She's the leading authority on psychological safety. She wrote this book, The Fearless Organization, which I would always recommend because we also draw so much learnings from her amazing work on this. And what she also offers us is a very, very concrete framework to start applying psychological safety as a manager, but also just as an employee, as a team lead, as an executive. 3 stages. If you can set the stage, invite engagement, and respond productively, and do that step by step in various organizational contexts, you will build psychological safety. It's a proven framework, but then again, it looks easy on paper, just a couple of words, 3 steps. In practice, this is incredibly hard. It's not a quick fix. It's something that you build on. As I said, it's a group phenomenon. So how would you do that? And of course, we're going to go through this very fast, very high level. I would definitely recommend you dive into Amy Edmondson's work, get her book, read it as well. But let's see what it's all about. So setting the stage, it's about being able to frame the context of a conversation, being able to explain the purpose of why we are, in this case, in an organizational change, being able to communicate the complexity of a certain change initiative. Imagine you're undergoing a huge cultural transformations. Why are we doing this? In the dialogues that you're having, in the communication that you're bringing forward, are you able to get the purpose right and communicate it in the right way? And are you also able to control the frame of the conversation in a positive way? Can you show people, can you get all the people with their noses in the same direction and get the idea across about what we're in for, what we're up against, why it matters, and why we should tackle that as a team? Reinforcing that value of diverse perspectives is incredibly important. And so there are many ways, of course, in which you can set the stage, but also think about that anytime that you engage in change, that you try to draw in other stakeholders. Am I setting the stage in the right way? Am I getting the purpose across? Am I exercising a positive control over the frame of the conversation? And you can see that in the way that people respond to you. The second step is about inviting engagement. This is crucially important, and it goes wrong in so many organizations because it's just very, very hard. If you have a culture that is a bit risk aversive, if you have a culture where there are some people that are, loud talkers and other people that are a bit more in the background, you will have these asymmetries, these discrepancies between the feeling of being able to speak up, daring to make mistakes, daring to weigh in without the fear of negative repercussion. That is what interpersonal risk taking is all about. Now, you can invite engagement just by making sure that you model it in the right way, that you ask people for, what's your opinion about this? Would you like to weigh in on this? Be the first one to engage others and make sure that they feel welcome, that their voice is heard, right? You can model this in your own behavior. You can share that you also don't know everything as a leader or change manager or a colleague. You can share that you're making mistakes, or failures. You can model these and just be that first role model. Take some interpersonal risk to create it for the larger organization. Foster openness, right? Ask questions that are both deep and broad to your team members, but also to your managers, to your colleagues. There's this wonderful method called appreciative inquiry that you can Google as well, which will teach you a lot about asking the right questions, which is something that is absolutely key when it comes down to inviting engagement. If you can ask powerful questions, you will see that people start responding more, that they'll feel safer, and that they'll feel more invited to the table, that they feel like their voices should be heard and will be heard because you are modeling that in a very excellent way. And again, this is something that it looks easy on paper, probably, but it takes so much practice. We've been working on this with senior leadership teams in global multinational organizations that have been, leading teams for over 25 years, and yet they still, every time that we do these types of exercises, they just tell us it's super hard to do this consistently, step by step, because it requires you to take interpersonal risk. It's a scary thing sometimes, but it's a necessary thing. Third step is about responding productively. And this is something that also often goes very much wrong in organizations and teams, but it doesn't have to. When you are inviting participation, step two, and people are actually, they're starting to partake, they're coming into the conversation, they're sharing their opinions, their views. It's very likely that a manager or a colleague is just kind of like biting them off and just saying like, well, that's not how we do things here. That's not the way of this company. Or, well, I'm not too sure if that's a productive strategy. That is not really responding productively. Of course, it's okay to have criticism, but by getting into the habit of just first of all saying, hey, thank you for your input. Excellent that you're bringing this up. I really appreciate that you're bringing this to the table. And then, of course, you can go after someone, but I'm not sure if it's the right thing for now. But having that initial habit of just responding productively, regardless of what someone is saying, as long as it's genuine, as long as someone is genuinely trying to partake, that's a habit that should get in there at some point in every leadership team, in every professional in the organization. And there are more things that you can do to respond productively, right? You can help people frame the way that they express uncertainties or express fears or failures by framing them into opportunities. This is what growth mindset is all about. We have a whole webinar about growth mindset that you can see on our channel, on the YouTube channel. Which, go check it out. Go check out Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, which goes into this as well. It's all about responding productively, initiating the growth mindset. Another tip is recognize excellence in action. So when someone is doing great, when someone is actively partaking, they're taking interpersonal risk, they're sharing their opinions, they're creating dialogue, recognize it in action while it's happening with other people there. Just say, this is the behavior that we want to see. Focus on specific behaviors. Just make sure that you get that specificity right. If someone is speaking up in a meeting at the right point, say, hey, it's great that you're speaking up in the meeting at this point, because that's exactly what we need right now. It sounds stupid almost stupid when in theory, when we're explaining it in this webinar format, but when you're in a meeting, under stress, in a project, this can make all the difference in the world. So basically 3 steps, right? Set the stage, invite participation, respond productively. And there are many ways in which you can do this. Again, refer to Amy Edmondson's work and build your own toolkit. But as long as you can become good at this and exercise it step by step, you won't be a superstar in psychological safety immediately. But step by step, you can get better, build it within your team, have other people role model it as well, and create that group feeling of psychological safety. It's not an overnight thing. It's a progressive journey. It is, but it's the only way to create that safe environment in which organizations in, the 21st century, especially post-COVID, can flourish, can innovate, can be adaptive, and can be resilient. Okay, so we spent some extra time on psychological safety. We should, but we should talk about 2 other interventions as well. This is something completely different. It is also, taking a step back, what are we talking about? We're talking about stakeholder engagement in the context of organizational change. Psychological safety, very important. But knowing where your stakeholders, especially those that have influence, are in the organization is also just as important. This is an intervention, organizational network analysis, that is not about debates and about role modeling and about having the real conversation. This is a more analytical intervention, which is also not my specialty. So if I make any technical errors, you know where they come from. But I have been doing this quite a lot in organizations with my team, and it's a great way to understand stakeholders beyond the organizational chart. what we see here in the left is something that if you work at a company, you can find this document somewhere. It's buried in some drawer or in SharePoint or Teams. There is an organizational chart, and you will find your name on there or your function as well. And in the box below you, that's, basically that's your boss who you report to, and the person that is in the box that is somewhere lower than your box is the person that reports to you. This is an organizational chart. It's very hierarchical. It serves some purposes, but not that much when it comes down to organizational change. But what we do see is that people are using this to implement changes top down. We have the board of directors, they approve something, the CEO might run out a communication memo, and we have all the teams underneath it that will roll out the change step by step by step. Usually this doesn't work very well because this is about formal hierarchies, about literally an organizational chart. But what is just as important are the informal leaders, the figures of influence in an organization that might not have the biggest office or the highest title, but have tremendous amount of influence on the way that people follow them, behave, and operate. Now, this is what you see on the right here, this picture. This is what we call an organizational network analysis chart. It is a network of stakeholders, and all these little lines are their connections to other stakeholders. And in this webinar, I won't be able to get into the technicalities of how this works, but I'll explain it to you conceptually. And by conducting an organizational network analysis, we have a video on this as well, where we go into the technical details a bit more, so go check that out. But you can map the organization's informal leaders, the figures of influence, the change champions or change agents, or what you might call them, and get them inside, reach out to them, and make sure that they become ambassadors of change. It's a way more effective strategy often than the top-down strategy. And especially when you combine them, you can really reap merit. So organizational network analysis, all about uncovering informal hierarchies, the change agents that are not directors of the company, but they have a lot of influence. And they can play a key role in propagating change. So this disconnect is important to understand because you won't be able to find these people on a regular org chart. And also, by just asking interview questions, it's also hard to identify who these central people in the organization are that everyone is looking at and listening to. But maybe it's not that conscious. There are some people that are just, informal, natural leaders. And even if you would ask them, are you an informal, natural leader? They would say, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to do my job, trying to make sure everyone's on the same page. That is where this organizational network analysis can be a way more effective tool because it's a quantitative approach. Now, to make this a bit less vague, because as long as we're never actually doing this, this will remain a bit vague, I'll tell you about a use case that we've conducted ourselves within a government, a department within a government. Can't go into too much detail, of course, but the goal there was to increase cultural diversity in upper management. So we have all these interventions mapped out for behavior change, for inclusive leadership, for increasing diversity within teams. But then we had to make sure, can we find the right people in this big governmental organization to propagate these changes? So we set out an organizational network analysis, and you can do this through a survey where you ask people some questions and they answer which people they talk to, they communicate with, they feel bonded with. I can't go into too much detail about the operational side because I will talk for hours. But you run out a survey and you get a set of quantitative data, which you will have to statistically analyze. That's where your data scientists will come in handy. And the result will be this network map that you just saw a couple slides back. And we did the same thing. And of course, it's hard to get everyone to fill out the survey. It won't be immediately a complete image, but we did immediately see some clusters of stakeholders that were not as connected to the organization as other clusters. And when we dig deeper into this data, we saw that in a lot of cases, these were actually groups that had a multicultural background, that had a lot of cultural diversity, and that were visibly on these network charts more disconnected from teams and organizations than people that stakeholder groups that did not have a lot of cultural diversity. So in this way, you can get so much insight into your stakeholder landscape, into your stakeholder map that goes way more beyond formal hierarchies and formal leadership. It really digs into where are the people that are very connected, where are the people that are more disconnected, and how can we pinpoint our interventions and tailor it to them. So step by step, what you can do, you identify the need for an organizational network analysis. If you have a big change going on, imagine you have a hybrid working transformation in your organization. Everyone is coming back to the office, but just a couple days per week, and we need to set it all up. And we need hybrid teams, we need on-site teams, we need digital teams. You want to get this network analysis done. So you assemble a team, get some data scientists on there as people that can help you with the numbers, define the scope. Are we going to try it in a small team or a department? Roll out the survey, and you can actually find these surveys online. They are available. There are also companies that can help you with this. And then when you have the data, you can start mapping out these these organizational network stakeholder maps. And you can see, look at that. In the marketing department, there is indeed this small cluster of stakeholders that has a lot of influence over other departments. Let's get them on the change team and make sure that they actively help us implement interventions, propagate communications. It's all about seeing where your nodes of influence are and bringing them into the plan instead of trying to plan around them or without them. And this is something that you don't just do once. Actually, we would advise if you are undergoing a big multi-year change, run one of these network analysis every half a year, maybe every quarter, even, and then you can get these dynamic impressions of where are my stakeholders of influence, where are they moving, are there more knots and lines appearing, what is the impact that we're having on a network level. So again, this intervention, it's an analytical one, it's a quantitative one, it's pretty hard. We discuss it in detail in the book, and we have some videos on it as well. But it is one of these things that should never be overlooked, especially when we're talking about complex changes where human behavior is a core part of it. This will help you become more adaptive in your approach, more resilient, and it will also just create buy-in, right? It will get people to be enthusiastic about, oh yeah, I am one of those maybe informal leaders. Let's work together. Let's build change step by step and drive it forward in that way. So that's what organizational network analysis is about. And then I wanted to run through one more intervention with you. And this one is not as complex. It's not analytical or quantitative. You can make it so, but it's called the red-blue team. And it's very much key for stakeholder engagement. As the name suggests, it's about splitting a group up into a red team and a blue team and making them go into constructive dialogue, or let's say maybe debate, or maybe even the constructive conflict with each other. We usually refer to red blue team as the devil's advocate on steroids. And I'll tell you why in just a bit. This is one of these interventions that we apply almost all the time when it comes down to sensitive organizational changes, because it helps get the real conversation done. That said, it is quite important that you have a psychologically safe team or department or organizations before you try this, because otherwise it might have detrimental effects, counterproductive effect on how people talk to each other. Because, as the name suggests, it can become quite an intense intervention. So Red Blue Team comes from a military context, actually. It's how the military used to prepare, and still prepares, for different scenarios. And instead of assigning a devil's advocate, one person that is like, but maybe we should look at it from this way, or I don't agree, because it's a whole team exercise. So you have a whole devil's advocate team, the red team, and then there's the blue team that will argue in favor of a statement. So let's take that hybrid working example that we had. And you could pose the question like, becoming a hybrid working organization will have a positive effect on employee engagement. Just to say something like that, the red team would do everything in their mind to undermine that statement, to attack it, to destroy it if they will. And the blue team would do the exact opposite. They will argue in favor and they will make the case for this statement. And the great thing is that this creates a lot of positive tension and constructive conflict, but it needs to happen in a safe environment. That's why this goes great if you pair it with psychological safety. It goes beyond devil's advocate, because you have great devil's advocates in some contexts, but not everyone can be a great devil's advocate, because you'll be just that one person. And the data suggests that even good devil's advocates are still conforming to group pressure, especially when the stakes are high. That's not true for red-blue teams. This is a way more productive debate intervention. It will get your team used to speaking up, and it addresses a lot of these underlying biases, confirmation bias, seeing the world only through your own glasses and only seeing what you already believe, and not seeing things that might disprove your opinion. authority bias, what the highest paid person in the room says is the truth. The bandwagon effect, if half of the room is saying this, then I might just agree with them. Red Blue Team will take care of all of that. It will make sure that these biases are mitigated in a very productive way, because it sparks constructive conflict. It's been used in a lot of contexts. As I said, it stems from military operations. When we talk about competitive analysis in business and investment, capital project bidding, venture capital, private equity, they are all masters of red blue team decision making. Cybersecurity is also one of these areas that is using this all the time. I think that they even invented a version where there is also a yellow team and a purple team, but let's not get into that right now. Even for assessing the survivability of space systems, red blue team exercises are used, because they are such great debative exercises to get people out of the way that they usually think, and their thinking patterns and biases and heuristics, and conforming to the group and group think, and really gets people on the edge, make them think very analytically and critically about said business case or statement. Now, there are many exercises or case examples that you can use this in. Investing more heavily in private equity will return superior. Will be using the superior returns for our clients is something that an investment company might do. Integrating ESG factors will enhance our portfolio. It's also something we've heard from a private equity fund. Switching to passive investment strategies will be amazing for aligning our clients. So these are just things that we picked up from clients that we've worked with, where they did red blue team exercises in. But it will work just as well when you use organizational change examples. As I said, switching to hybrid will result into more productivity amongst employees. Having a new diversity, equity, and inclusion policy will make sure that we will become a more culturally diverse organization. Also something that you can do a red blue team exercise about. And the reason that it works so well is because you can really draw people into that conversation before you start rolling out changes, before you start changing ways of working. You want to get this out of the way. You want to have the real discussion. So let's just get into how to make this very practical. Imagine you have a big organizational change coming up. Let's say it's about a new DEI policy, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you notice that there is some unease among some stakeholder groups, and some strong enthusiasm among other stakeholder groups. And you notice that there is some resistance, but they're not really talking about it. So you get a group of representative people together, and then at random, you split them into teams. So these are not existing teams or department. You just at random form teams, split them up. Make sure that they're randomized in such a way that there might be some people in the red team that actually agree with the blue team, but right now they have to play their role, and the opposite, the other way around as well. You can assign some roles. Each team has a team lead. Each team might have someone that is taking notes. Each team might have someone that gets into the habit of collecting all the arguments and reframing them into arguments for the red team or the blue team. Have them do thorough research. And this is where things can get interesting. When we do this with clients, we sometimes just we take half a day to run this for a particular challenge. But in some projects, we can take a whole week for red blue teams, because we want people to prepare, to do research, to do due diligence, and we'll take 1 day or 2 days, maybe even, for the discussion. So make sure you do your research, you prepare, have the groups present their arguments. The blue team will go first. This is why we think it's constructive to integrate these new DEI policies. Red team might say, well, now let's present our arguments. And then the constructive conflict starts. And this is where strong facilitation is absolutely key. So make sure that you as a change manager or leader or employee, you're there to facilitate, to make sure there is psychological safety. People are actively listening to each other. They're not just hammering their points home. People are setting the stage, inviting participation, responding productively. Right? Remember the psychological safety steps. People are going into constructive conflict, but they're doing it in a respectful way. And you'll see what this does to the climate of dialogue in your team or department or organization. You'll see how this intervention will work its magic when you do it right, because it will get people out of their shell. It will get people really passionately arguing for the red and blue team, because it's human psychology, right? When we have a team and we say, well, you're the red team now. There was this one client that we presented with red and blue armbands. And this actually, at least we didn't measure it concretely, but we had the idea that it had a positive effect on group cohesion. So the red team was just really clumping together, the blue team was doing the same thing, and they were going at it at this statement. So once the constructive conflict is done, and as I said, you can run a red blue team in half an hour if you want to, but you can also take a whole week for it. You want a strong evaluation. You want to weigh the pros and cons of both teams, and then you want to present that to a decision maker. Or if you take the decision internally, then you want the decision maker to evaluate those points and then make the decision. Or it's a decision making team, that's also possible. And what you'll notice is that this decision will contain way more alternatives, way more broad and depths of arguments, and it will offer a way more objective um, and tangible view of the outcomes of whatever decision is going to be made. So if you have bottom line, your organization is changing, you have to change stuff, you have to make decisions about that. The decisions that are going to weigh heavy, don't conduct them before doing this red blue team with a set of great stakeholders that represent the team or department or organization that is going to be executing this decision, because this will help you a lot in getting the real picture out there, create buy-in, and increase what we're talking about this whole webinar, increase stakeholder engagement in a very tangible, measurable, and productive way as well. This can be a lot of fun. It's also intense, but it can definitely be tons of fun as well. Okay, so three interventions we talked about: psychological safety, organizational network analysis, red blue team. I must say we only skimmed the tip of these interventions, right? We discussed them in depth in the book. On paper, it always sounds like, it's easy to do. You can start applying them tomorrow, but to really master them, there's a lot of behavior change knowledge, techniques, insights, theory, framework, methodology that goes into this. So if you want to get into the deep, go to our channel, watch some videos. We have a lot of in-depth videos. Look at the book. It will get you very much more acquainted with these types of interventions. And one question that I will answer up front before we go into Q&A is, where do I find time to apply all this stuff? And this is what's asked to us all the time. We have change managers, organizational leaders, teams that are like, this sounds great, but where can we apply this stuff? Where we don't have time to do a whole psychological safety thing. And then I would say, start small. Everyone can do this. Everyone can start with just these 3 habits. What was it? Set the stage, invite participation, respond productively. What would that mean for you? How would you apply that? And you maybe you apply it in your next Monday meeting, and you invite people to partake in the discussion. You respond more productively. Start experimenting. Ask people, hey, do you notice a difference? You can start that small with interventions. Run a red blue team with 2 people. You can do that as well, right? Start small. Use existing meetings and processes that are already planned. Just take 15 minutes off the top of a meeting to apply one of these interventions, and then experiment. If the red blue team doesn't work out, then maybe you want to focus on psychological safety first a bit more. Experiment step by step, measure your results, present them, and then grow these interventions into more serious scale strategies. Because in the end, they will make for better stakeholder engagement, and at the large, they will make for organizational change that is more human-centric, that is more positive in behavior, and that is more sustained in the way in which it lasts throughout time. Because change is here to stay, right? And probably humans will be a part of organizations for a long time. So why not make sure that we harness the power of the insights and science that teaches us how to intervene here and how to change and apply it, right? That's basically what it comes down to. Okay, so enough for today. I'll see if there's anyone left for the Q&A, because we had some technical errors. It might be that some people missed this, but we'll send them the recording, of course. You can find the recording on this YouTube channel, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan. Check out our other videos that go in depth about these interventions. Check out our book. We're very excited about it, and it's really the synthesis of our work. And on our website, there are lots of other free resources, databases with cognitive biases that might be interesting. We have a blog with over 100 articles. Our mission is to democratize the knowledge of behavioral science and how to apply it. And we have tons of free resources that will stay free, that you can dive into to learn more today or tomorrow, whatever you see fit. Okay, thank you very much. I'll move to the Q&A now. And if you want to go grab lunch for the remaining 15 minutes, please be my guest. I'll stick around for some questions. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm monitoring the chat. Let's see if there's anyone here. My colleague Alex is also here. There's one question about the recording. It will remain available on this page. You can download. You can watch it on YouTube. We'll be here. We'll be free. It will always be. Feel free to share it as well. Is there anyone else that has a question about the interventions that we discussed? I'm just trying to get into this whole new environment of YouTube Live. So my apologies if we're a bit rusty. Okay, well, I don't see anything in the chat, which might be a good sign or a bad sign, technically. But you can always watch this recording back. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us as well. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find me over email. You can contact us through the website. Feel free to just get in touch. As I said, democratizing behavioral science is our mission. And we will always have plenty of resources to do that with you and for you. So that being said, I will end this stream, this first live stream on YouTube, and we'll be back with another webinar in a month, where we'll tackle one of these other critical change areas and chapters in our book. But for now, thank you very much for your effort and attention, and we will see you at a later point. Goodbye.